Hello, my name is Bi-yoon. I am a professor in the Department of Political Science Diplomacy, Sungkyunkwan University, Seoul, South Korea. I am currently serving as a visiting fellow of International Consortium for Research in the Humanities, Faith, Freedom, and Prognostication at the Erlangen-Nuremberg University. Today, I will speak about some medieval murals in the vaulted Great Chamber in Longthorpe Tower in Peterborough, England. They are parts of a 14th century fresco cycle, which is believed to have been created around 1330. Its commissioner is most probably the knight Robert Thorpe, who was steward of the liberty of Peterborough Abbey. The frescoes went lost later as the room was painted anew, and most probably not once. They saw daylight again as a tenant discovered them while preparing to redecorate the room in 1945. Because the frescoes remained on the layers of limewash for long, many of their details are lost together with the Latin inscriptions. These images make a proper understanding of the meaning and message of some parts of the murals very difficult and controversial. I came across the murals in the course of my research on the medieval symbolism of fortune and fate. Since 2005, I have endeavored to decipher those images, and I have illuminated several fascinating aspects of these murals in my publication and studies. I have been especially interested in their connection to an organic conception of the state of the High and later Middle Ages, which conceived the state in the image of the king's second and artificial body, and the Arabic contribution to its development, which is discernible there. I will briefly introduce these images now, summarizing the result of my researches so far. The first mural we are concerned with here depicts a large wheel with 5 creatures around the outer side of the rim. A male figure stands behind the wheel, a crown on his head. You see his crown. The creatures are an ape, a vulture, a spider on its web, a boar, and a cockerel. Though some identifies the latter as a basilisk. It is agreed in the literature that the 5 creatures on the wheel are symbols of the 5 senses. The ape represents taste. The vulture, smell. The spider, touch. The wild boar, hearing. And finally, the cockerel, sight. Scholars seeking to decipher the message of the mural have often linked it to the wheel of fortune. Fortune's wheel symbolizes the fatalistic idea in the Middle Ages that human life is in the hands of an unknowable power, turning incessantly and bringing the top to the bottom to the top. Fortune's wheel implies that all human achievements are precarious and ephemeral. Locating the symbols of 5 senses around the wheel would signify, if we follow this hypothesis, mistrust in the human senses. This interpretation ignores, however, that throughout the Middle Ages, a wheel was also a symbol of a perfect order and eternal stability. The concept of such circles dominated the medieval view of the world. Every imaginable ideal process or ideal, such as time, for instance, hours, days, weeks, months, and seasons, or meteorological phenomena, the 4 directions and 4 winds, the inner order of the human body, the 4 elements and the 4 humors, even the ethical principles and harmony among the 4 cardinal virtues and the 7 liberal arts were eventually subjected to the image of revolving circles. The Longthorpe mural was influenced by this artistic imagination. The contention that God's creation and government provides an example for all sorts of human endeavors, including the government of the state, was accepted in the Middle Ages. In Latin, ars imitatur naturam. In English, art imitates nature was a generally accepted maxim at the time. A perfect political order could be depicted in the image of the wheel as much as other orders found in the universe. Especially relevant to our discussion are several medieval illustrations where the wheels and circles appear as God's body. The basic idea in those illustrations is that God leads the universe as the head controls the body. As the body expresses the mind, the universe reveals God's reason. Our mural appropriates this formation. In the context of medieval political discourse, the king's rule of the state was conceived in the image of God's government of the universe. The large wheel overlapping the king's body symbolized the state as the king's artificial body, and its circular form and the movement stand for the harmony and perfection to be realized there. Here, the painter of the mural seems to have been inspired especially by a passage in the Secretum Secretorum, a pseudo-Aristotelian mirror of prince. The Secretum Secretorum was written in the form of a letter from Aristotle to his pupil Alexander the Great, instructing him on the proper behavior of a true king. The Secretum Secretorum was one of the most widely read texts of the late Middle Ages. It was occupied a privileged position in the political discourse at the time when the Longthorpe murals were created. In the Secretum Secretorum, there is a passage where pseudo-Aristotle preaches to Alexander the Great that in creating man, God made his body like a city with reason as its king, and appointed 5 senses as 5 ministers to help him in the government of the body, to administer to his needs and advise against harm. What is interesting is the Secretum Secretorum's unusual origin and career. It was written in Arabic around 10th century in the Near East and arrived in Western Europe via Islamic Spain. After its first Latin translation in the 12th century, other Latin and vernacular translations adaptations appeared. Of course, the analogy between God's government of the universe and king's rule cannot be exclusively attributed to the Secretum Secretorum. Nevertheless, this picture demonstrates contributions the Arabic traditions made to the development of an important ideological tradition most eloquently. The mural also shows that knowledge of the natural world was not irrelevant to the education of political leaders during the Middle Ages. In fact, the zoological, botanical, and meteorological knowledge made up an important part of ethical and political discourse of the time. We can understand in this context the presence of depictions of natural order beside other depictions of religious and ethical motives and ideas in the fresco cycle of Longthorpe Tower. The north wall shows, for instance, an illustration of the 7 ages of man around the arch, just above a scene of nativity, the birth of Jesus in a stall. You find here Joseph sitting, and also you find here Maria and Mary, the Mother of Holy God. And you see here the depiction of the 7 ages of man, beginning with infancy and ascending to prime. You find, even if it's not very well discernible, but It describes a stout young man here. And the depiction ends up with decrepitude. You find the old man standing with his stick. While this image comments on an ironclad law that all human beings are subject to, it preaches of the need to cultivate virtue and lead an ethical life. The labors of the monks above and around the recess of the west wall accentuate the regularity dominating natural world and human life even more. You find here this part. It begins with the man sitting at a fire and successively represent the work typical of each month. Although it is not shown in this picture very clearly, actually it is located here. The last figure corresponding to December shows a man butchering a pig, probably with an axe. The fourth and last mural of my presentation especially interests us because it demonstrates the attention paid to astrological knowledge in medieval political discourse. The mural is just above the first mural I already introduced. It depicts a fashionably dressed young man who wears a glove and is accompanied by a dog here. There is also a part of another figure with a tip of a scabbard against his leg. He is positioned opposite the young man and dog and appears to be greeting that young man. A clue to this picture may be found in the same Secretum Secretorum which I referred to in reinterpreting the first mural. Immediately after explaining the importance of having good ministers to assist the king, Aristotle lectures on the importance of astrological knowledge in selecting ministers. The stars ruling over a person's birth decide his character and talents and determine the potential and limitations of the person. To illuminate this point, Aristotle narrates an episode of an Indian prince determined by his birth to become a blacksmith. Despite his father's effort to teach him the art of government, the sole inclination of the prince is towards smithery. The prince's father consults all the astrologers of the age, but they unanimously confirm that a person's nature as determined by the stars cannot be reversed. I believe the scene with the stylish young man pertains to this episode of the prince. The first clue is the scabbard over the leg of the unidentified figure opposite the young man. This detail makes it plausible to interpret the unidentified figure as the blacksmith who teaches his craft to the prince in the story. The second clue is the young man's fine gloves and hair, which attest to nobility of the prince in the story. The third clue might be the dog. In the Middle Ages, there was a legend about a race of dog originating from India. In Latin, Canis Indicus. In English, an Indian dog. In the zoological tradition since antiquity, the Indian dog was believed to be born from the union of a male tiger and a female dog, and possesses unusual ferocity and bravery. It may be the case that the dog was described to evoke India as the place of the scene. As a whole, the Longthorpe murals mirror the complexity and the fusion of medieval culture. The Longthorpe mural testifies that the medieval West was not in isolation, but was in the process of constant exchanges of ideas, fascinating cultural dialogues.